Good afternoon. My name is Diana Gamlin, and I will be presenting on Bloom's taxonomy. I do apologize for the tardiness of this presentation. I evacuated for Hurricane Irma last week and left my charger for my computer at my house. So now that I'm back home and settled, I'm getting this up, and I hope everyone weathered the storm well. Okay, so let's get into Bloom's taxonomy. Dr. Benjamin Bloom is credited with developing Bloom's taxonomy, and he decided that classifying educational goals and objectives was very important. It was important for both students and teachers. And this was done in 1956. He developed this original, what we used to refer to as the pyramid, Bloom's pyramid. And it was modified in 2001 in order to add more relevance for 21st century learners. And this was done after 11 years of studying and fully understanding what was within each of these levels of the pyramid. Many of you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy already. It's something that's used all the time in a K-12 setting. Many teachers, whether it's elementary or secondary, are familiar, and they still likely use this form of a model to organize and plan their learning goals or objectives. And then with organizing and planning learning goals and objectives, we're able to develop meaningful learning and lessons. So why should we use Bloom's taxonomy? It's a great question. Well, first, it establishes clear objectives for students. Teachers, therefore, have a framework to now organize these objectives in, and now both the teacher and the student have clarification of what those objectives or frameworks are for learning. Now, this further leads to the ability to plan and deliver lessons effectively and meaningfully. Also, to design assessments. You want your assessments to replicate or mirror what your objectives are. You want to make sure you're assessing on your objectives or learning goals. And then also to ensure that instruction and assessments are aligned together. Okay, so let's take a look at the original Bloom's taxonomy versus today's. So if we look here at the original Bloom's taxonomy, I've also laid it out in this order. The first one was knowledge. That was your foundational model. Then came comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. We'll take a look at what each of these components consist of and what we would use to define each of these categories. But first, let's take a look at how they've actually changed. So the first thing you'll notice is that these words are nouns. Knowledge is a noun, comprehension is a noun, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. When we move over here, we notice that these words here are verbs. They're action. They're showing, doing, creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering. There's also a cross section here. So one of the biggest changes when the pyramid shifted to this new way of thinking, and many people actually no longer refer to it as a pyramid, and we'll take a look at that later on in the presentation. But we see this evaluation has now come before the creation step. And there's a reason for that. Before, it used to be the synthesis came before the evaluation. But really, after many studies and a lot of research, they found out that evaluating actually should come before you create something or develop something. So let's go ahead and look at the revised Bloom's taxonomy. So like I said, the main change was we are now working with verbs. Okay, so the first verb is to remember, and this is the recall stage or the recognizing stage. You will see words like students will recognize vocabulary words, students will identify parts of speech. This is your basic recall, basic knowledge, and being able to remember and maintain the knowledge. So this is the first fundamental step in the pyramid. Second, understand. So this is where we're restating, putting things in our own words. Under this category, you may see things like students will construct meaning, or students will comprehend material, make use of the material they've learned. You may also see words like interpret or summarize. Students will summarize a short story of the Three Little Pigs. You will also see words like classify and infer. When students are able to construct meaning and restate things in their own words, they're classifying information, or making inferences. If we move on to the next category, we have apply. Used to be referred to as application, but now we want students to apply. We want students to solve problems, make connections, or illustrate how something, how a message is portrayed, or what the theme is in a novel. Illustrate doesn't always mean to draw. You can also illustrate with words. This is the one that's very popular today, especially in the middle school and secondary setting. Use the data to show. We are teaching our students that data isn't always just numbers. It's evidence, it's relevance. Anything that you can use data to show or to apply those new skills. Okay, we can continue on with analyze. Again, used to be analysis. This represents the breakdown and how we can illustrate relationships. We can differentiate or organize materials where students are illustrating these relationships between, or organizing information to understand it. Also, to create diagrams. If you're analyzing data, now we can go to math for this one. So if I'm taking a group of data, how can I show that this data has meaning behind it? Are there patterns? Are there, is the data showing that there's something not being effective? So these are the different areas that an analysis can fall under. And the last two are evaluate and create. If we want students to evaluate, we want them to validate information, validate facts, validate points of view. And we also want them to critique. We want them to criticize. Is there a flaw in an argument? Find it. How could you fix it? How could you go against it? These are all really, really important skills that students need to have as they continue in their educational journey. And then this last step, the top of the pyramid, is create. This is where they're proposing or designing or producing. These 6 levels are so important when teachers are thinking about standards and creating learning goals for students. So you'll notice today that I use the word steps a lot, or pyramid. So we have really moved away from that Bloom's pyramid, and many teachers and educators are thinking of Bloom's more as a step system, right? Climbing the stairs. Because sometimes we have to go back down and sometimes we can go back up. And it all lies in these action verbs and the action that's behind each of these steps in order to remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. I wanted to show you an example of how we could see the different steps of Bloom's in a lesson. I chose math. I teach middle school math, so I'm always looking at math and how things can apply in math. So this is what I found, and I thought I would share it with everyone. This was for fractions, so adding and subtracting fractions, including mixed numbers. So the first step would be to assess students' vocabulary. What is a denominator? What is a numerator? I may even go into what is a reciprocal, and that sort of thing. Then understanding. The understanding step is, why are equivalent fractions important when adding or subtracting? Is there only one possible common denominator? that answer is actually no, because you can have multiple common denominators. It depends on if it is a factor. And so in thinking about all of this as I'm doing my blooms, I'm actually thinking about us and our initial assignment that we were given to choose a learning goal that we are going to break down and do for our project for this class. So there's so much that's now this has me thinking about, right? Okay, so continuing on, we have applying. So what is a common denominator for 1/3 plus 1/4? So students would have to now remember that, well, 3 and 4, 12. 12 is a multiple of both 3 and 4. So then they would change these fractions and they would become 4/12 and 3/12. And now they can add these fractions together. And then analyzing. So many times we have our students say, hey, complete this math problem, just tell me the answer. But really analyze. What strategy did the student use to find the common denominator when adding or subtracting fractions? They have to understand their thinking. And this is one thing that I really have tried to emphasize with my students over the past few years, is to show your thinking. And this is that analysis stage. And then last, evaluating. How do you show that fractions are equivalent? Can you show me? Can you draw it in a diagram? Can you explain it through your words? And then last but not least, creating. The answer to a fraction question is 7/12. What could be the question? And this is obviously your higher order question. This is a question that many students might find challenging, and only your high students would be able to interpret this very quickly. Interpret this question very quickly. So I thought this was a great example that I could share in how I could use blooms to break down and differentiate my instruction for my students. Because at the end of the day, I think my goal is to have all students in the creation step, but I think, to be honest, not everyone is ready for this today. But understanding and remembering and applying and analyzing, these 4 steps are essential in getting to the top. So just to leave you with, if you like that pyramid view, we could still refer to it as the pyramid, but here is another summary of just kind of the Bloom's taxonomy model in the old pyramid format, but still it's the same information. And Bloom's is extremely important in today's classroom, and even over 50 years later, we can still take his original taxonomy and apply it to what we do in our classrooms each and every day. And my sources are attached at the end. I will post my questions in our discussion board, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.